So I was originally going to make a patch parody video for the update that dropped for Black Ops 4 on Tuesday, but let's be honest, it's the usual Treyarch doing the minimal type of effort you come to expect from the studio, with introducing such groundbreaking features like putting a new external lighting source on the map Hacienda for Twilight, and not in the vampire-y lovey-dovey kind of way, more maps in Prop Hunt and Capture the Flag, medals in Blackout is an easy port over from the multiplayer, ripping off a better battle royale game Apex Legends with finishers, renaming them humiliations in order to make them seem innovative, hard mode gauntlets for zombies, which begs the question, weren't gauntlets supposed to be the hard mode after all, and the implementation of contracts, but in a far worse manner than the previous Call of Duty World War II had on launch, to earn a chance to get a piece of flair or other meaningless beepity bop out of an RNG crate. And of course, there's the twist that every single patch has, where all of the, quote, hard work is completely negated by one new mechanic in order to give Activision, spelled with a $sign, even more money on micro, or should I say macro transactions, by this time around adding in blackjack stashes to some Blackout modes, which are loot drops that contain any black market weapons that you have unlocked in your particular individual collection, which essentially makes it a pay to chance to win, since players that have more or better DLC guns than others have an in-game advantage in a mode where the loot pool is supposed to be identical for all players. However, all of this was usurped when Kotaku dropped a follow-up to their article where they revealed that Treyarch would be taking over the lead developer on Call of Duty 2020, with Raven and Sledgehammer Games taking on a side role. And in this follow-up, Jason Schreier pulls back the onion layers on what it's like to work at Treyarch, specifically during the development periods of Black Ops 3 and Black Ops 4. I'll go into the supercalifragilisticexpial atrocious treatment of employees a bit later, but first let's discuss the development timeline for the games, as it was revealed that Black Ops 3 was originally supposed to have an open world campaign that was scrapped for unknown reasons into a more traditional linear campaign, although with Black Ops 3 you can complete any mission in any order, and there was the safe house area where you could create loadouts, view collectibles, and interact with other members of your squad, since you could play that mode with up to 3 other players. Both of these particular features are obvious remnants of what would have been an open world experience. In the case of Black Ops 4, there were leaks prior to the reveal that a campaign had been in place but was scrapped due to it being too complicated with time travel elements. However, the description in the article seems to contradict the campaign contents of the earlier leak. According to Kotaku, there was a campaign that was sort of a competitive mode where you could play with a friend against 2 other players to complete objectives in an offense-defense fashion, or you could play solo with AI bots if you're hashtag forever alone, that actually had a playable demo as late as the end of 2017, 11 months before launch of the game. However, weeks later, Treyarch's leadership made the decision that the campaign was to be cut due to several reasons, including technical concerns and issues, along with negative feedback from initial playtesters about it being repetitive and stale. If this is the case, I wonder how Spec Ops will be received in Modern Warfare coming out later this year, considering that campaign description sounds an awful like the co-op mode for the upcoming Call of Duty title. So when Treyarch's Dan Bunting said in a Polygon interview prior to launch, quote,
"We set out to make this game. We never started with the idea that we would make a traditional campaign. That was just not part of our plan. We started from a place that we were going to make a game that across the board can be playable with friends. That's been our mission from day one."
Did he flat out lie? While it's true that the purported campaign was a co-op affair similar to Black Ops 3's story mode, it depends on what you mean by traditional campaign, because one could argue that the 2v2 mode wasn't actually a traditional campaign, even though we could all just see right through that bullshit as a weaselly excuse to placate the people that were angry about them abandoning their core principles in order to chase trends. Speaking of which, they instead had to create an additional mode for the offering because multiplayer and zombies that are basically copy-pasted from the previous iteration isn't enough, so they decided to make a battle royale mode, since everybody at the studio was playing PUBG in their downtime, and Blackout is essentially PUBG with a Call of Duty skin. The Blackout mode wasn't even started until 9 months before they moved up 1 month to not compete with Red Dead Redemption 2's launch, and even though some campaign assets were reused in the Blackout map, it's astounding that it all came together in such a short time frame given the limitations of the Call of Duty engine. Obviously, in order to finish this, crunch was involved, something that's becoming a bit of a theme in the gaming development industry nowadays. Reading the article with how Treyarch has mismanaged its employees and negatively impacted its workplace culture, it clearly shows in its products. The working conditions at Treyarch for the test team, which by the way aren't even actual Treyarch employees, they're contracted out such that it absolves the company from the responsibilities of actually treating people like humans instead of like shit, are pretty horrifying when reading some of the anecdotes. The test team is responsible for ensuring your product doesn't get into the hands of customers in a fashion that they cannot use or has a plethora of bugs, but at Treyarch, they're treated like second-class citizens in many facets of their employment. Even minor things like separate parking lots and different badge colors that make them feel ostracized give way to greater grievances like not being eligible for bonuses when things actually do go well, and not not even being able to fraternize with development outside of the in-house bug reporting tool. Treyarch just doesn't paywall the items in its game, it does the same to its employees as well. I guess I'm not all that surprised given how many of these expose articles have come out recently regarding crunch and mismanagement with games like Fortnite and Anthem, but it doesn't make it any less awful when I do read them. I'm also a tester for a software development company, not a gaming development company though, and the stories about the development process in the article make me ask, why in the actual fuck are you doing it that way? It seems asinine and completely fucking backwards. At Treyarch, testers are essentially quarantined physically by forcing them to work in a completely different area from development, and psychologically by not allowing them to take part in workplace events nor collaborating between the development team and QA. Where I work, I share an office with a developer that is working on the project that I am actively testing. We have daily collaboration meetings where I can directly ask developers questions about their code and their design decisions and their expectations of how their code behaves, such that I can write up a test plan to ensure that all of the scenarios are covered before it ever hits the field. This lack of cross-pollination between dev and QA at Treyarch leads to massive issues with the game, whereby the testers don't know what the developers are doing, and given the patch cadence that Treyarch is going for, the testers don't even have enough time to validate the latest build going out into the wild because there's no notice of what or how things were changed. Whenever a patch goes up, there are inevitably problems that always devolve into, how did QA not find us? And the answer is always because there either isn't enough time or they didn't know that this aspect was altered in the first place. The excuse for this arbitrary separation stems from a set of leaks back in November by a former Treyarch QA tester who was fired for supposedly taking his break at the wrong time because QA testers are dictated their break times instead of developers that are able to take their mandated breaks whenever the fuck they please. Thus, developers don't want to run the risk of having QA know too much about the coming soon black hole. Of course, this excuse is complete bullshit, considering that the development problems in Black Ops 4 happened way before November, and testers have been treated like second-rate workers even before this event occurred, hence the whole reason why the leak happened in the first place, because the worker was disgruntled, and this is a big fuck you to Treyarch. The leaks concern how to complete zombies Easter eggs that were supposed to keep zombies players busy for a while the development team was trying to fix the bug-riddled mess of a mode, which is actually quite comically ironic since the Corrode Crovey Easter egg is still not fucking working to this day. The QA test is seen by development companies as a less skilled position than someone actually developing the game since they're, quote, just playing video games all day, and while I can concede the skill aspect might be somewhat true, their impact on the final product is just as important as the people making the assets or writing the lines of code. Paying people slightly above minimum wage and foregoing any employer responsibility in terms of benefits with the people that are literally the first customers of your product is not a recipe for success. Maybe these gaming companies got the idea that customers will actually pay to pre-order games to beta test for them early has muddied the waters for the people in actual QA tests. However, by the time you get to beta or even alpha, it's way too late to make any meaningful impact changes to the game. It's much cheaper and easier to fix problems the earlier that you find them in the development life cycle. Additionally, when games are shipped in broken states, developers have to work on said bugs instead of working on features that are promised to customers, which I'm actually surprised there hasn't been a false advertising class action lawsuit against some of these games. Or, let me speak in terms of publishing companies can understand now, these developers can't work on things that make them all of the money through microtransactions. Looking at Black Ops 4 specifically, it's no wonder why features that were promised, like factions and zombies and leaderboards and multiplayer, have fallen by the wayside due to development time being used up on fixing bugs instead of working on new functionality. In a different game, Battlefield 5 recently just had a bug that released all tank customization skins, including some of which that were not yet tested and others that were supposed to be sold for real-world currency. Thus, DICE lost money directly because they didn't QA test their patch properly. Even though Black Ops 4 initially sold well, the microtransaction sales were lagging behind where Activision wanted due to their own mismanagement of not having a plan for any major releases or revenue streams in 2019 aside from Call of Duty Modern Warfare, and part of the reason why these sales are lagging behind is most likely due to players abandoning ship, leaving the game in droves because of how buggy the fucking game was on its launch, especially with zombies being broken for months on goddamn end. The lack of interaction and time given a QA test directly impacted how Black Ops 4 performed, both in terms of core functionality and monetarily with post-launch revenue. Additionally, the article details how Activision kept pushing Treyarch to implement more and more ways to increase revenue, which developers do have the authority to make decisions about how that monetization happens. So no, Vaughn, you don't just make the shoe, you get to decide what type of shoe to make and whether or not to lock blackout characters behind a time wall, even though you promised that wasn't the case before the launch of the game, because you can influence that decision at your pay grade, or at the very least, don't write checks your ass can't cash and mislead your consumers. But the contractors and QA testers have no creative input in this process because of that aforementioned corporate segregation. Although it is Activision that puts the pressure on the developers, it seems that it's ultimately up to the development team themselves to figure out how to wrangle more money out of their customers. So that's why Treyarch's micro and macro transaction schemes in their games are so much more egregious filbin than in other studios for Call of Duty. Both companies are at fault, but it's important to note we cannot absolve Treyarch of blame here when talking about how microtransactions are implemented in their games. Speaking of that record-breaking launch revenue, QA tests didn't get bonuses when the game performs well, and obviously morale is disintegrated when they see developers that are compensated with bonuses when the game sells well and higher up management positions getting a $15 million sign-on incentive when they don't get a fucking goddamn dime. The lack of trickle-down isn't just an Activision and Treyarch thing. It happens at a lot of different corporations, including my own, but I at least get bonuses when times are good, even though they're not on the same scale as somebody in upper management. Testers are just as responsible as developers for making the product what it is, and clearly has an impact on both the launch and post-launch revenue streams, because who the fuck is going to buy a product like Fallout 76 that's unfinished at launch after seeing reviews of the game? Thus, they should be compensated similarly. Stir all of these things into a giant shit stew, and you have employees that are no longer passionate about making games. They're just doing the work to keep the lights on and food on the table, which brings me to another obvious observation about Black Ops 4 after reading all of the things in this article. The Blackout mode was clearly a passion project for a lot of people at the studio, since they were constantly playing PUBG throughout the development lifecycle during downtime, and it's clear based on how much better it is than both the multiplayer and zombies portion of the game that this is where the most time and effort was sunk into, especially given that it all came together in about the same amount of time it takes to have a baby. Blackout had minor issues with it compared to zombies being almost unplayable for a considerable amount of time after launch, and the multiplayer mode had both balancing problems and was basically a non-jetpack version of the previous game with old maps lazily thrown in to pad out the content. The Blackout mode was lauded while the others lambasted. It's clear that when employees are passionate about creating something, that will make for a better game than when they're just going through the motions to meet deadlines and collect a paycheck. So what do we as consumers do about this? Obviously voting with your wallet can help, but it's pretty much impossible to organize enough people to make an impact that will be felt by the people that only care about the bottom line. Legislation and or unionization needs to happen to force these companies to not race to the bottom when it comes to the treatment of their employees. You can clamor for people to just take another job if this one's so shitty, but when every gig in town is exactly the same, what's the other job to take if you're someone that's a game developer or tester? You have to change industries completely, which is why I'm glad that I'm in the spot that I am as a tester at my software development company versus being treated like a second-rate worker for a gaming company, even though that's my favorite hobby. Extrapolate that line of thinking onto any person that wants to go into software development, and you're going to be left with zero gaming companies around because nobody's going to want to go into the fucking industry. No games for us, or the ones that do actually come out, are going to be so fucking shitty because their workers don't want to work at it. When your workers don't give a shit and you treat them like shit, it shows in your product, as evidenced by the timeline of Black Ops 4. What do you think about the article that's becoming an all too common theme in the games industry today? Let me know in the comment section down below. I've been the Schwantz27, making like a fetus and heading out. Until next time.